Welcome to part 2 of our Scalability and the FileMaker platform. Now in our part 1 video, we defined that scalability is the ability for a FileMaker server to successfully host a FileMaker solution to many users simultaneously while maintaining an acceptable level of performance. And what does that mean? It means that as we add a lot of users to the FileMaker server, that the user experience continues to be quick and snappy. Now in part 2 of this video, I'm going to give you some additional tips and tricks to help make your solution scalable for a larger group of users. And some of these tips and tricks are now only possible with the FileMaker 13 platform. Now first off, I want to thank some of the folks over at Apple Corporate for their positive feedback about our part 1 video. Some of the employees over at Apple Inc. actually took some of our techniques discussed in part 1, and some of them have actually seen the preview of this part 2 movie and have already built into their own solution the things that we're going to show you here in this part 2 movie, and they report back that their FileMaker 14 solutions are now radically faster than they were with FileMaker 12. So once again, thanks to some of the staff at Apple for reviewing our content and validating the results. So first off, when a user logs into a hosted FileMaker solution, before a startup script can run, or before FileMaker can execute the file preferences under the File Options menu here, where the developer has specified switch to layout, the FileMaker client will automatically open the layout that was last viewed by the user when the database was closed, when the file was being run as a single user file. So let me say that one more time. It's a bit of an abstract concept. The last time the file was being run as a single user file, i.e. it wasn't running on the FileMaker server, the last layout that was visited by the user who was running the file as a single user file, and then they close the file, that layout will be loaded as the first layout they get as they log into the file before the startup script can run and before the switch to layout command can be executed. Now this is just a default behavior in FileMaker, and 99% of the time people never see this happen. But if you have a slow internet connection, some users will report that they saw some strange layout flash in front of them. It could even be a secret report or some sort of secure layout they're not even supposed to have access to. So keep in mind that if there's a lot of graphics on that layout, that the users are going to have to download all this material across their slow internet connection even before the startup scripts get going or that switch to layout command is executed. This can waste a ton of time, and you're wasting the patience of the user. So one of the keys to make sure your database runs quickly is that before you host the solution, make sure that you navigate to a completely blank layout. Make sure the layout has a neutral color in it with no graphics and no fields. It's a completely blank layout. And then close the database. Then take the database up to the server and host it. This will ensure that as the users are opening the databases remotely, they will load a blank layout, which will be very quick. It will speed their load and minimize the delay for them to get to their first screen. Now tip number 2 I want to talk about is to minimize the number of objects on the screens that you give the users, especially for layouts where the users are accessing those layouts remotely, especially if those connections are across the wide area network. And when I mean by wide area network, I'm saying the internet. So if you have users who are accessing a database and your server is, say, on the East Coast or the West Coast of the United States, and the users are on the other side of the continental United States, or maybe they're in Europe, or maybe they're halfway around the globe, you definitely want to make sure that the layouts that those people are accessing have the least number of objects on screen. And what do we mean by objects? Here you can see a field and a field label. Each of these objects in FileMaker is described by a block of XML, as you can see. Now there's XML for every object on a FileMaker layout. It's definitely inside the application, but for a vast majority of users, you're never going to see this. You have to be a pretty advanced developer to get under the hood to even see this stuff. That being said, it's definitely there. And for FileMaker Pro or Go or even WebDirect to render these objects on screen, this XML has to be pushed down through the network to the client for it to be displayed. Now, of course, the more objects you have on screen, the more blocks of XML that have to be pushed down through the network to the client. So, of course, the whole idea is to minimize the amount of data going from the server across the network to the client. So minimize the objects on screen. Minimize the number of fields. Minimize the number of graphics. The fewer items you have on screen, the fewer blocks of XML that have to go across the network. So now that we've decided that we want to minimize the number of objects on the layout, there are some new specific things that we can do in FileMaker Pro 14 that can greatly improve the performance and the load times of our layouts for our users as they log in to our FileMaker solutions. Now, my team develops and maintains FM Starting Point, which is the free starter solution that's available at fmstartingpoint.com. Now, this is a very popular starter solution, and approximately 100 people every day download this solution. Now, for the release of FM Starting Point 4, we went and performed all these optimizations to make FM Starting Point run as fast as possible. And what were the results? Well, they're the same results that the folks at Apple saw when they made the same optimizations to their databases. In a lot of cases, your databases will download and run as much as 200% faster, as opposed to a database that was running in FileMaker 12. How is this even possible? Well, let me show you. Now, I have an application called Wireshark, and this is an application that allows me to measure the bandwidth, the amount of network traffic between FileMaker Server and a FileMaker client like FileMaker Go or Pro, or in this case, WebDirect. Now, I have a copy of FM Starting Point that I have put up on my FileMaker 14 server. And I've gone ahead and logged on to FM Starting Point with my copy of Pro 14. We're going to use Wireshark and measure the bandwidth from the main menu right here to the contacts data entry screen right here. I'm going to press the button right here that allows me to jump to contacts and create a new record. So first off, I'm on a layout here, and this is a layout that we created in FileMaker 12. So like most users, if you really want to customize your layouts in FileMaker 12, you end up using the classic theme and customizing the layout to meet your particular needs. And this was pretty common. At the FileMaker Developers Conference, when asked for a show of hands, a vast majority of users were using the classic themes to customize their layouts, just the way they wanted to use it. Just because in FileMaker 12, you couldn't really customize the themes and the styles the way you needed to. Remember, that was only added with 13. The problem with using the classic theme is that for every object on the layout, there's a complete set of CSS that tells FileMaker how to draw the object. And that is really wasteful. The idea is to have the objects that are very similar share the same description. And that is what we can now do by using a shared style. What I'm going to do is walk you through how we made this layout twice as fast. So first off, I'm going to create a new window, and I'm still on this contacts layout. I don't want to mess this up, so I'm going to go ahead and say layout, duplicate layout. Now, from versions to versions of FileMaker products, from 12 to 13 to 14, FileMaker does update the themes. And some of the themes become out of date, and FileMaker introduced new themes. I can do that by going to the layout and change theme. Now, the themes under Aspire were actually introduced in FileMaker 13. I'm going to select Vibrant because it's kind of cool. It reminds me of the layout that we used previously. I'm going to look at this, and it's not too horrible, but it's different than what we had before. And so I asked one of my engineers, that is one of the new guys on the team, to sit down, and he spent about half a day retooling this layout to make it look like the original design, because I kind of like the original layout over here. And I said, can't you make this and tweak it and customize it and make it look like this old design? And so we went to layout mode, and he actually went over here and went under data and into the appearance panel and made all sorts of little tweaks and things. And what he would do is he would take all the objects like this, go to style, and after adjusting it the way he wanted it, he would say that this is going to be a new style. And he would say this is going to be FM starting points, standard edit box, and say, okay. Now this is going to be a save style, and that's part of this theme, which is now part of this layout. Now this has its own block of CSS. I can click on other similar objects over here, and they still have their own block of CSS. And that CSS is part of that XML we saw earlier, right? The big block of code that explains how it renders in the layout mode, right? So I'm going to select all these over here and all these everywhere over here, and I'm going to tell them to use the standard save style so that we have a shared style. That's a big, important vocabulary word, shared style. They're all sharing the same style instead of having their own individual block of descriptive CSS. They're all sharing the same block, and suddenly this layout is already much lighter. Now it was already radically transformed under the hood when I converted it to the Vibrant theme, but we wanted to customize it with shared styles so it had the design that my team had approved of. So what we end up with after half a day of work was a layout that looked like this. So here you can see what we have is a layout that looks almost identical. The difference is this layout right here is using the original classic theme. But this layout right here, we have created all of the shared styles between the fields, and it has its own custom theme. So this layout right here is much lighter, and that is the critical piece of knowledge that I'm trying to explain. And I hope that you understand that you can take this knowledge away and employ it on your own solution. So if you look right here at these labels, you can see that these labels share their own shared style. If you look at these buttons across the top, they share a shared style. So you get the idea that you have shared styles between similar objects. So what was the difference in bandwidth between this layout and the classic layout with a custom theme? Well, this layout to push to download one time as we navigate from home to contacts was 850 kilobytes of information, or almost a megabyte of information. And that's quite a bit for a single layout. By creating a custom theme for the layout and shared styles, the single process of going from the home layout to the contacts layout was reduced to about 425 kilobytes, or about half the original size, which may translate to about twice the speed of the original depending upon network conditions. But you may get twice the speed. So we thought that was a pretty amazing improvement. So as a side note, we decided that since we took a FileMaker design and we were monkeying around with it quite a bit, what if we took the FileMaker design and left it unaltered? And so we measured that too. We actually went to this layout over here, and this one is based upon the stone theme, and it is unaltered. Of course, from theme to theme, the weight will change somewhat, but the cost of going home to the contacts data entry layout went down to about 225 kilobytes. So we go from 850 to about 425, which is a huge improvement, and the interface looks almost identical. And if you're willing to give up on your custom design entirely, you can cut that design down in half again. Now at this point, I want to do a quick comparison on this layout when rendered between WebDirect 13 and WebDirect 14. Now you already saw the difference in actual user experience with the performance as you clicked. It was radically faster. But what is the actual difference in kilobytes? Well, it's not as much as you might think. When we did a test with WebDirect 14, of course, we were getting 425 kilobytes when going from the home screen to the contacts data entry screen. When going from the home screen to the contacts data entry screen on WebDirect 13, the amount of data that moved was somewhere around 480K. So it's a little bit more. So in the process of FileMaker optimizing the code, they actually remove the amount of data that's going down the pipe, but not radically so. It's lighter by maybe 15%, somewhere in that range. So while the amount of data going from the server to WebDirect is lighter by about 15%, the efficiency of that code is radically improved to the tune of making it run about twice as fast on the actual browser itself. So just keep that in mind. So now I've showed you how much you can save if you set up your own customized theme and shared styles. Let me explain to you a bit more about how this works. First off, if you click on an object and make customized changes to that individual object, then you're creating an additional level of CSS that is local to that object. This is called a local override for the CSS. Now this is a little bit technical, but effectively what you're doing is creating a whole lot of extra work, and the downside is that FileMaker has to push that extra CSS, that local override, down through the network from FileMaker Server to the web browser for the user to access it with WebDirect. Or for that matter, any remote client, including FileMaker Go or FileMaker Pro. So try to minimize making individual customizations to objects. If you're going to make individual customizations, try to take that object, go to Style, and save the style or create a new style. This allows those object attributes to be saved at the layout level and to be shared with other objects on the layout without additional penalty. Another hot tip that you should consider is that the Format Painter tool up here in the corner should be avoided at all costs if you're building a layout for deployment on WebDirect. And that's because of the way the Format Painter tool works. Now, FileMaker Engineering is aware of this issue that I'm about to explain to you. And they haven't come up with an easy way of fixing it yet, so we're just kind of stuck with it. And that is that when you use the Format Painter tool, it copies the settings of one object and allows you to apply them to another object. And of course, you would think to yourself that if you have an object that is saved to a style, then it will replicate those settings to the object that you're painting the settings to. Because the Object Painter tool is a tool that allows you to basically copy settings off of one object and apply them to another object. The problem with the Format Painter tool is that when it paints those settings to the destination object, it paints them in entirely as local overrides. Now just a second ago, if you're paying attention, you remember that I said local overrides are bad. Well, that's right. Local overrides create all sorts of extra bulky CSS. So when you use the Format Painter tool, all the settings for the object that you just painted into become really fat and heavy. Now you don't see it, but under the hood, that object is now way overweight. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. And as that object renders across the layout, it's going to cause a performance hit. Now if you have only one object on screen like that, you may never notice it. But if you run around on screen with the Format Painter tool, going clickety clickety click, you're going to be in big trouble because that's going to really put a drag on your layout rendering. So I advise against using the Format Painter tool for use with WebDirect. Now a couple of long-standing recommendations that I want to remind you of before we sign off. First off, sticking large images on your WebDirect layout is generally not recommended. So if you have a beautiful picture of Hawaii or a race car or maybe a fighter plane or something that you would like to use as a background image for WebDirect, I highly recommend against it. In fact, you need to stay away from images if at all possible. Now FileMaker 14 does have built-in images they call glyphs that are available as part of the button setup when you're setting up buttons in FileMaker Pro. These glyphs are very efficient and they're effectively what we call SVG. That's vector artwork, but it's very efficient, optimized artwork that's really lightweight. So those are good images that you can use, but they're somewhat drab and boring. So I imagine that other people are going to come out with libraries of SVGs that you'll be able to copy and paste into your FileMaker solution. As a general rule, creating fancy images with Photoshop is going to create large images that FileMaker has to render and push down through the network. Once again, that's not recommended. A couple other tips about WebDirect. tab and slide controls generally have a lot of object data associated with them. That's that XML that we saw earlier. I recommend using tab and slide controls sparingly, just for the sake of not loading extra data on your screen that you don't need. Once again, create dedicated workflow that's mission specific to the users who are accessing the WebDirect interface. If you create tabbed interfaces and you load tons of data into the tabbed interface, WebDirect has to download all that information to display it. And if you have an underpowered Android device, that's going to make your life more challenging than it has to be. The same is also true for popovers. Popovers were added in FileMaker 13 and give you some ways of kind of mitigating the issues of not having multiple windows that you can pop in a browser. But of course, don't get too crazy with adding too many popovers. Because of course, FileMaker WebDirect has to collect all that popover data through the network to render the popover should you click on it. So just keep that in mind. Now, something else to keep in mind is that script triggers are something that's new to the FileMaker platform probably in the last decade or so. Script triggers are really neat, but because there's no database engine in your WebDirect, anytime you trip a script trigger, WebDirect has to send a message to FileMaker Server across the network and ask FileMaker Server what to do. So if you're the kind of person that likes to put script triggers everywhere, you might want to rethink that just a little bit, because every time you activate a script trigger, you're causing interaction back and forth across the network between you and your FileMaker Server. And for best performance, you want to mitigate that traffic back and forth. So that basically wraps things up here for our FileMaker 14 WebDirect video. I appreciate everyone who's watched this video, and be sure to pass this link on to your friends. Subscribe to our channel here at FileMaker Training Videos. We have lots of viewers. And if you want to learn more about FileMaker Pro and you want some awesome training, check out learningfilemaker.com. In the Pro 14 training course and in the Go 14 training course, we definitely have more interesting animations and lots of explosions to keep people entertained. So that's it for now. Feel free to email me anytime with questions at support@rcconsulting. Don't forget to like this video and post your comments down below.